Hello. All right. My name is Nathan Dunlap. I am the lead animator for the Star Wars team at Respawn Entertainment. And today we are going to nerd out about one pose in the specific case of combat AI. Though later on, I'll talk about how this applies to animation more broadly. And one thing I want to say before I start is that the information in this talk was gleaned from our post-mortem after we shipped JFO1. It's always good to have post-mortems and sort of look at what you've done and take a step back and see where you can improve and what you can do better. So I started in this industry in 2012, working on a hack and slash Ninja Gaiden spin-off game called Yaiba. I then went on to work on the reimagining of the classic King's Quest series, and from there I moved over to Respawn to work on Jedi Fallen Order. During Jedi Fallen Order, my responsibilities were primarily twofold: creating Cal's combat animations and implementing and helping to build his in-engine navigation systems. So you might ask, why would I, working only on the hero, be able to come up with this talk about AI animation? And I will say that by working exclusively on the hero, I always had fresh eyes on every AI, so I saw them the same way a player would at first blush without having been deeply involved in their development. Also, we had to make sure the hero's attacks worked with all the AI's reactions and vice versa, that their attacks worked with the hero's reactions, so I regularly fought against the entire AI cast at various points in their development, from when they first started coming online to as they hit the more polished stage. Finally, I was able to beat the game on Jedi Grandmaster, which isn't a brag, it's not impressive. If you've been working on the hero character for over 2 years, you should darn well be able to beat your own game on the hardest difficulty. But all these things together gave me a fresh player's perspective, if you will, of the AI cast. So, who here has played Jedi Fallen Order? I was going to ask this question at GDC where I could see people, but since I can't see you, give me an F in the chat if you've played Jedi Fallen Order. Okay, we got one. Oh, there we go. Sweet. So now, who can relate to this image? There we go. Yeah, this guy was a bit rough. This talk is for you. It'll show you one of the main reasons why that character called Bogdo is so difficult, other than the fact that he can basically one-shot you at the beginning of the game when you run into him, and why there are so many therapy jokes on Reddit about him. So first, I'm going to just really quickly clear up some terminology that I'm going to use throughout the talk. By frustrating, I mean the experience whereby a player does not immediately understand why they got hit or took damage. In these cases, the player has to memorize the timing of an enemy. We all do this in combat games, but in this case, the player must really memorize it without visual clues. You see the anticipation, and you have to get hit or try to dodge getting hit multiple times in order to know when the enemy will leave the anticipation and actually strike you. I call this experimentation by death, and it's not necessarily bad. A lot of games are like this, and a lot of players, I think, enjoy this sort of mechanic. It can give the player an intense sense of accomplishment once they've memorized this esoteric timing that isn't just visually obvious. Now, by challenging, I mean the experience whereby a player knows exactly why they got hit. They can see the attack coming, and they know from the very first time they get hit that it was just bad timing on their part that resulted in the damage. After the hit, the player thinks, I see what I did wrong there. I see when the attack was going to happen. I just wasn't fast enough. I know what I'm going to try next time. This is what I call informed experimentation. It is giving the player all of the information he or she needs before the damage. It doesn't necessarily mean giving the player a lot of time with this information, but it does mean making sure the player knows before the damage that it is going to happen, even if it's only a tenth of a second before that damage lands. So having said that, this is generally how the animators worked on the AI. Each AI had a specific designer and an animator paired together that saw the creation of that AI through from beginning to end. I believe this is common practice across the industry. We all know how personal and unique an AI can feel when you have the same people working on it from its conception till final ship. Generally speaking, the animator would provide rough block-out combat animations to the designer. These animations were usually hand-keyed, and they would have important poses and the timing and the translation dictated by design. We'd get information from design, like the attack lands on frame such and such, the character moves forward so many meters, his cooldown is so many frames. In my experience, it is not uncommon for designers or animators in games to think about attacks in these simplified terms. And this is fine, but we're just going to add a little bit to that on the animation side. The combat designer would then take these rough blockout animations, fine-tune them in-game by using in-engine tools to adjust the timing or the translation, and they could play test, and they had a very rapid iteration this way, and this would go, steps 2 and 3 would be the rapid iteration cycle. Once the designer was happy, and the AI worked well within the rest of the cast, the animator would incorporate those in-engine changes in Maya, make sure that any speeding up and slowing down and translational changes the designer had implemented actually worked with the body mechanics, and then they polish the animation. So it's pretty basic. I don't think there's anything amazing here. Just it's nice groundwork to understand for the background of different parts of this talk. So one more bit of standard basic information. I know there's a bunch of animators here, but I'm just going to run through the standard attack animation poses, and I'm going to use the we call it the Grunt Stormtrooper with his baton swing. It was animated by David Nam, and I'm going to use this as my example for standard attack poses. So you have the anticipation, and everyone knows this shows that the character is leaving navigation or idling or whatever it was they were doing before, and they're about to hurt you. And then there's the hurt frame. They swing through and they deal damage. And then after that, there's the follow through. And this sells weight. You can put personality in here. That's really fun. And it usually, depending on the game, opens up the character for a period of vulnerability where the player can then attack the AI. I'm not including the idle here at the beginning or end because I don't consider it specifically part of the attack, because he can be coming from pretty much anything. So there isn't really a specific pose that is the beginning that's, fundamental to the attack. These are the fundamental poses to the attack. We do need one more pose, but I'll approach that. I want to lay a little bit more groundwork to explain why. In a parry-centric game, like Jedi Fallen Order, we had the difficulty was tuned the parry window. And our parry window, so to speak, the amount of time that you had to parry an attack successfully, lived on the hero side, not on the AI. So if an enemy's attack landed on the hero during a predefined time during the hero's block enter animation, when he goes into his blocking, then the enemy's attack is parried. So if we look closer, we changed the parry window based on difficulty, and in the easiest difficulty, we had this window, story mode difficulty. So that means that if you triggered the block animation and at any point in the first 30 frames the enemy landed, contacted the hero during those first 30 frames, it was considered a successful parry. And we just shortened this for each difficulty. We brought it down to 14 frames for Jedi difficulty, we brought it down to 9 for Jedi Master, and we brought it down to just 4 frames for Jedi Grand Master. So to pull off a successful parry in Jedi Grand Master, you had to pull block within a 4-frame window of the enemy's damage landing on you. So that is the reason why it's important to know when the enemy is going to actually hit you, the exact moment of hitting. Not that they're about to hit you, but the exact moment of when they're going to hit. So if we look at the the Grunt's attack, the Grunt is, in my opinion, the easiest character to parry across all difficulties. If you can parry him in Jedi Knight, sort of standard difficulty, you should be able to parry him fairly easily in Jedi Grand Master. And this is because the time of his damage is telegraphed so clearly. So if we explore his basic swing attack, you can see that's the frame the player wants to know about. That's the frame that's crucial to successfully parrying the Grunt. So we'll look at his attack one more time, and we'll see him enter his anticipation pose here. This is the pose that shows that the attack is going to happen. He's done running. He's about to try and hurt the hero. But this is a moving pose, so he's moving through this, and we want to know when he's going to leave this pose and when he's actually going to strike the hero. And so if we... Oops, my bad. Go back. We watch him stay in this moving pose. The pose that we want to see is this one. In this pose, the weapon, or the baton, has not yet advanced towards the hero. And the baton has electricity on it. It's the thing that generally players watch. They generally watch the thing they know is going to hurt them because they're trying to anticipate it. So your eyes are focused on the baton. And that hasn't moved towards the hero yet. It's still behind the Grunt, still away. And the Grunt has broken out of his attack anticipation pose, the silhouette in white, and moved into this green pose where he's twisted his shoulders and he's totally broken his silhouette. But he hasn't moved the baton. And we can see as we sort of boomerang through this these two poses, you can see how the baton doesn't have a lot of movement, but the Grunt's body does have a lot of movement. And this is important because the Grunt's body is sort of, as you might say, in the player's peripheral because they're watching the weapon. So you're more likely to respond instinctively to something that's happening in your peripheral than to something you're actively focusing on, like the weapon. So breaking the Grunt's pose, that peripheral aspect of him, and making that have a sudden movement in it in the shoulders before the weapon actually comes at you right there, gives the player an instinctive sense of when the damage is about to happen. And there aren't that many frames from breaking that pose to actually causing damage, but you can kind of see at speed, you should be able to tap out on your desk or your keyboard right now exactly when the Grunt's going to hit, and you haven't even been playing the game recently, I bet. It's a clear rhythm and a clear sort of secondary breaking of the anticipation. I think Richard Williams talks about this as a second anticipation in his book even. It's a fairly fundamental animation technique, but this is a specific application, and these are specific uses you can use in a combat game. The biggest thing I feel coming out of this is that if the player gets hit with an attack that they can see coming, that they feel that it's their own fault for missing, and it's not that the game is trying to cheat them, or that they just did a bad guess at when the attack was going to land. So, it's important to add this second anticipation to your first blocking pass, if that's how you work. The way I described before, where we have the several sort of like rough hand key animation that designer first works with. And the reason for this is, if you don't have that anticipation in, it can be misleading where your AI are. So we had one character, for instance, in development where the anticipation, I think the character had 6 keys. There was, some starting idle, an anticipation pose, a duplicated anticipation pose some frames later to handle the wind up, stand in for the wind up, and then like 3 frames to a strike, and then a follow through pose, and then back to idle. And so it's basically bare bones, but this character was almost impossible to play because you saw him go into his anticipation, you had no clue when they were going to break out and when they were going to hit the player. And so because of that, his anticipation window and his cooldown windows were tuned to that sort of impossible difficulty. Once this character got mocapped, that second anticipation came in for free because that's actually how humans move. When you want to get like a lot of power behind something, you'll snap your body forward and sort of whip the fist or the weapon around. And once that happened, the attack was much easier to read and it became much more easy to parry him. And because he had been tuned to these huge anticipation windows and cooldowns, he became way easier than we wanted him to be, and he had to be kind of tuned again. So that's something you want to avoid. So you want to add this second anticipation pose that shows when they're breaking out of the main anticipation or your moving hold or however you want to talk about that and going into the strike. And that way your characters and your AI can be tuned accurately by design earlier in production, and there's no surprise if you go into mocap. This is also kind of becomes really relevant with creatures because creatures, especially if they're made up creatures like in the Star Wars universe, you don't get to mocap them. So you always have to hand key them, and it's good to put this sort of early information in up front. If you do work with mocap only, it's still really important to know about this because what you can do is exaggerate this pose. It's like a secondary pose, but the same way that you exaggerate the striking pose or an anticipation pose, or you play with the spacing of mocap to make it more powerful, this second anticipation is extremely important to exaggerate. You'll find that not only does it help sell the strike timing to the player, but you'll also it also just creates more impact. It's sort of like, I think the way Richard Williams introduces is a way to produce more impact in the animation, and it also, in our case in games, helps telegraph the striking frame. So now let's go back to this guy. You can sort of see why he was such a difficult enemy to fight. So if we look at his attack, this double bite, you spend hours trying to learn how to avoid this thing or even parry it. Did you even know you can parry it? If you do, it makes you feel like a super badass. But this animation has all the usual pieces that people talk about. It has strong anticipation, it has a powerful strike, it has good weighty follow through, he kind of shakes himself and he's got some animal personality in there. This is a great animation. But it was really hard because it didn't have that second anticipation coming out of his primary anticipation pose. And you can see it here. If we watch him strike one more time for this video, and then he goes into his anticipation pose. This is his silhouette for anticipation. And then the damage causer, his mouth, is the first thing that moves at you, and he doesn't even really break his silhouette here. He's basically just a big ball that suddenly lunges at you. This is the sort of thing that can cause frustration in players. You can parry this guy, and after playing him enough times, you can parry him every time, because you'll memorize his timing. But what's happened is you've brute force memorized his timing by dying to him so many times. Hence the Reddit memes. And it kind of requires you to get hit time and time again. I think you potentially could learn this by dodging him every time, but you're going to get a more visceral sense of the timing if you actually just get hit by him. And since in the beginning he can one-shot you, that means dying. So the game doesn't really require you to take damage, but in all reality, you kind of have to take damage in order to learn how to parry this guy. So this can be frustrating for some players because it feels like the timing and when he's going to hit you is sort of arbitrary. It's obviously not. He's been tuned carefully, but it's a little hidden from the player. So what do we do about him, though? What do we do with something like him, or it, where the damage causer is not so easily dragged behind like a baton? It's the damage causer is a mouth, which is in front, and the creature is basically an enormous mouth. So how would we put that second anticipation in? There's a lot of different ways, but we actually have some good examples on another creature. So this creature, who I think it's Wyyyshokk, it was animated by Daesop Chang, and it's basically a big ball, and it has a tiny little mouth, and the mouth is in front, and it has some similar challenges that the Bogdo has. So here we can see it's one of his attacks, and it comes up, hits Cal. This one I found fairly easy to learn the parry timing. And the reason for this is you've got your clear anticipation, where it raises itself up on its back legs, but instead of the mouth moving at him, the outside legs break the silhouette first, and that indicates that it's leaving that reared up pose and about to drop down and cause damage. So in this case, the mouth is kind of literally dragged behind as it falls down and as the legs anticipate. So here's a good example, but the Bogdo attack doesn't rear up. But the Wyyyshokk also has a lunging attack. And this attack I also found, I guess, not easy to learn to parry, but it felt less frustrating and more like I was making the mistakes, and less that the game was sort of getting one up on me. It's very similar to the Bogdo's attack. The creature rears back, it's a big sphere, it has a mouth, and it goes forward. There's a very clever anticipation pose that happens here, and you can see it where before it lunges forward, it drops down and the big abdomen leans forward over the top of its back. And that's when the mouth jumps forward. So the mouth doesn't move forward at the player when it breaks out of the anticipation. The mouth actually kind of goes down, and the back part of the body, I will play this again, moves towards the player before the front part of the body does. And that little peripheral motion on the big abdomen helps instinctively tell the player that the damage is going to happen, and it's going to happen within like 2 or 3 frames. And, you know, animating at 30 frames per second, that's a very small amount of time. So there are clever ways to break the silhouette, no matter what your creature is and no matter what it is. We're animators, we move things, we shape them around, we squish them. There's always a way to break that anticipation silhouette without taking the damage causer, kind of awkward phrase, the damage causer, without leading with that. You can drag that behind, even if dragging behind kind of means keeping it just still in front and everything else moves in forward around it. So I will say, obviously, this is not a hard rule. This is something that I think people should know about and use wisely. It's a way of clearly telegraphing that the AI is leaving the attack anticipation and it's about to cause damage. You can use this knowledge for good by adding it into your animations so that the player will not feel frustrated, or you can use this knowledge for evil by not including this pose so that the player will be surprised by the timing and generally die a lot. But seriously, it's like any other principle, it's a tool to be used and not blindly followed. You can use this to as a fake out, where you would put this anticipation pose, breakdown anticipation pose in and not deliver on the damage and sort of trick the player into moving a certain way. And you see this in soccer all the time. I'm sure all the sports animators are nodding right now. But you see this guy fake out the keeper here. And we're going to go into slow motion and watch this, and you'll see how he goes into an anticipation pose, does a second anticipation pose, and it's at the moment of the second anticipation pose that the keeper commits. And we're going to call the ball the sort of damage causer, because the ball is a thing the keeper wants to handle, just like a weapon or a baton or the mouth is a thing the player wants to handle and like deal with. So yeah, we'll move into this now. You can see him come in, and right here, this is sort of his crouched anticipation pose. It shows he's going to leave. It's moving, his arm's going up, he's leaving his dribbling, the ball, the damage causer isn't going anywhere. That green, how his arm comes down and his knees shift direction, they actually go from pointing screen left to screen right, and his hips drop. It's at that moment that the keeper commits, and the keeper thinks that he's going in that direction. But the damage causer doesn't follow behind like in our game. Oops, I apologize. You can see the damage causer, or the ball, just keeps moving forward. The keeper has committed to parrying or defending, as it were, and then he can score. So we have a couple characters that made use of this where they would feint, and like with an E, not an A, and they would fake the player out with their attack. So this is a fun thing you can use. This is an example of how you can take that second anticipation and not just think this only works with attacking AI. This works with attacking AI that are going to fake the player out. It's basically a way of indicating that a fast action that you want the player to respond to is going to happen, and if you don't want the player to respond to it, or if you want it to be kind of hidden, you would try and reduce the visibility of the second anticipation. And that's it for my talk. It's pretty quick. Thank you for listening. I want to thank all the animators here who made the animation on JFO amazing, and who the information in this talk is sort of a collaborative post-mortem with all these wonderful people. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Nathan. Hello.
Hello.
I'm back. All right. So I have some questions from the chat for you. Let me find them. All right. Okay, so Katie Betters asks, how much iteration did you find yourself doing to determine what parts of the body lead the silhouette first?
How much iteration? This, you mean in order to, I guess, could you read it one more time?
Yeah.
I think there's two questions there, and I'll answer them
Yeah,
both.
it's basically asking how much did you have to mess with the silhouette to kind of determine like what parts of the body should kind of stick out of the silhouette to clue in the players. Does that kind of make sense?
Gotcha. Yeah, so that's gonna be specific to each creature and each character, and the weapon and the fighting stance and the speed at which they're moving. It's some characters it kind of feels instinctive and natural. Like obviously, if you have a character swinging a baseball bat, which is something we're super familiar with, you can find ways of breaking that pretty quickly. If you know that you're looking for that pose and you look at your reference, you can see where you want to twist the shoulders first and leave the bat behind. For things like creatures, especially made-up creatures, it can require a little bit more iteration, experimentation, and then it's just it's fun and it's sort of up to you to. I wouldn't say that there's always this body part or that aspect has to trigger. It's just that something needs to break out of that silhouette.
Gotcha.
And so I think there's actually a lot of creative freedom there.
Nice. Okay, we have a question from Melissa Shim. She asks, a lot of creatures' movements can easily look cute or not threatening. Did you find that was a common thing when you were trying to pose the characters or coming up with
Uh-oh,
attacks?
I might have lost my internet.
Oh no! We can still see you. Hang on one second, guys. Nathan?
Oh, hello.
Hello.
Yeah, I think my internet must have bounced.
I know. Well,
How much of that did you catch?
I mean, we did see you standing there a little bit awkwardly, but we saw it very clearly on our side. Here, I'll go ahead and repeat the question though for you. Melissa Shim is asking a lot of creature movements can easily look cute and not threatening. Did you find that was a common thing when coming up with the attacks for the creatures?
That was something we definitely had to watch out for. It depends on the creature design. Some creature designs, well, I guess, you can have creatures that some people think are cute and some think are gross, but That was definitely something we had to be aware of because we wanted the hostile creatures to not feel super cute. We didn't like the idea of you having uh, all these cute little things that you then were trying to kill you, and then you had to kill them.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
did you ever think of just adding a friend command into it, and then you could just walk around and collect them like Pokemon? I'm just saying that that could be an idea for like your next game.
the cutest creature in Jedi Fallen Order is on Bogano, on the first planet you go to, and it's you can find one and you can befriend it, but
My new goal.
it's secret, so you should find it yourself.
Okay. All right. All right. Then no problem. I will play it, and I will do this. Okay. We have a question. What was your favorite creature that you worked on?
My favorite creature that I worked on. So, like I said, I primarily worked on the hero. So I didn't actually end up. I didn't really work on any of the directly on any of the AI. I did have. There was one AI that was cut, that I worked on very early on, and it had a very very complex rig. So we joked that it was the trial by fire creature that we would throw to new animators for like a few months, and then we ended up cutting it because it just got too complex.
Was that good for you? Like, were you relieved by that, or was
Yes.
it a hard?
Everyone is
Okay.
everyone is relieved to see this thing leave.
All right. All right. Fair enough. Oh, and so if you didn't work on the creature, then what was your favorite animation that you did for the game?
My favorite animation I did for the game was probably there's um a small handful of animations where after encounters, Cal will holster his lightsaber with some flair. He'll like twirl it in his hand and like throw it down. There's one where he kind of blows on it like it's a gun, like blows the
Nice.
smoke out of it, and it's
How
those were
lasers
really
work.
fun to do.
Yeah.
Those were really fun.
Did
Someone
you just kind
someone
of
asked for that.
incorporate? Yeah. So did you just kind of incorporate what you did when you were swinging around a cardboard roll? Because that's usually what I do whenever
Oh
I
yeah.
finish
Oh
WoW.
yeah. Except I didn't twirl it because I can't do it that fast, so I just kind of mimed it and got as much attitude as I could.
Nice.
But someone asked, I think, if we could put that flare in, and I said, "Oh man, how much? I want to do all of these."
We have a question here. What resources would you suggest for people looking to get better at creature animation?
um, I mean, it's kind of as usual. You'd study life, study creatures that are. If you're working on a creature right now, study creatures that are close to that. If you're not working on a creature, you just kind of want to improve in general. The sort of thing I've found that improves the best is find something that you want to work on. Find a creature that you like and that you are going to be happy staring at for hours and hours and hours and sort of disseminating its movement. And then just study as much reference as you can. If it's dog like and you have a dog, then you can play with your dog and film it doing things. But there's tons and tons of reference available on YouTube. And then I believe there's a few there's some libraries too, I think, of creature animation, but YouTube's pretty full of creature animation. Honestly, I found mealworm traversal reference on YouTube. And after I found that, I thought, yeah, there's basically everything here. There's no dearth of reference availability.
Yeah. I mean, if I could play with dogs for reference, I would also prefer to do that. Sorry, I'm just going to bump up my mic volume. They're saying it's a little low. That's
But yeah, going to
very
the zoo is good too. Going to the zoo because then you can see the animals from different angles and not just the same action from one angle. But approach it the same way you approach human animation and know about, like, look for places where a second anticipation would be. Even if it's not an attack, that just helps sell what the creature is doing.
Mhm.
And look for the weight shifts and things like that.
Yeah. Also, any reason to go to the zoo, really.
Yeah, exactly.
I like animals. All right. How did you find working with Lucasfilm, and was there anything that you really wanted to do that they said no to?
I don't know if I'm allowed to tell those ideas.
What you can tell safely. We are not looking to get anyone fired.
No, I to be perfectly honest, I did not have very much interaction with Lucasfilm. They, I believe animation as a whole only got one or two notes back. I remember we got a note about some way we were animating the ATST, and they said that it was sort of canonically couldn't do that.
No.
And I remember there was the one got a direction from them, and then but not really a note. And the direction made total sense. It was really interesting. Spoilers for people who haven't played Jedi Fallen Order,
Oh no.
but I feel like this is okay. Cal eventually gets a double-sided staff lightsaber like Darth Maul. And when we were starting to explore that, there was direction from Lucasfilm that he could not feel like Darth Maul
Interesting.
or Ray Park, the actor who
Right.
played Darth Maul. And the reason they gave, and this is really cool because this is kind of like how you got to get deep into the lore. This is kind of stuff you have to respect. The reason is Darth Maul trained his whole life on that weapon, and Cal trained his life on a single saber up until like he was 10, and then it's later in the game when you can get this weapon. So Cal will have an instinctive sort of knack for using weapons, but he doesn't have the years of dedicated study. And they wanted to make sure that he didn't encroach on sort of Darth Maul's area of, I spent my whole life with this weapon.
Okay.
And it's a really cool, Lucasfilm tended to bring up a lot of really cool lore direction in that respect. And so that was something that was really, really helpful to sort of gauge your instincts against.
Yeah. That makes sense when you're working with such a universe that has so much history behind it. It's really cool that they kind of kept you guys on that, being like, well, this isn't canon. So
Yeah.
And also Dan Lowe says, so the ATST cannot wall run. Is that what you're saying?
I will neither confirm nor deny that it was wall running at some point in the game.
All right, we will let that slide and continue on. Were there considerations that you needed to make an animation to explicitly ensure that motion creatures or heroes felt Star Wars? So was there something future-y about future-y or Star Wars-y about your movement that you had to kind of keep in mind?
I don't remember any explicit rules that we followed. We were very, as a team, we were very invested in making it feel like Star Wars. So our general approach was to reference the movies first, and then after that we referenced the cartoons. And then for creatures, we'd reference like whatever we could find, like the closest real world counterpart for them. And I want to say that our team was just really good at following the sort of Star Wars flavor. We never got notes back about that. We never had some. There were a few times. I will say this: there were a few times when some of the animations I did on the hero came back, and the team would check me, and they'd say things like, "This doesn't feel Jedi. This feels dark and Sith-like." And I was like, "Oh, okay, I'll tone it down a little bit." And so we did have some direction like that. And there's a couple interesting things we had with some of the executions. It's like, how do you make the characters, where your fundamental aspect of the game is like you're going through killing stormtroopers, how do you make this feel satisfying, but not go into like a God of War arena or a place where Cal looks like he's enjoying it? And so we kind of came up, and we sort of internally came up with the verb efficient. And that sort of drove a lot of the combat on the hero's side in terms of its flavor. And that got us through. Like, we never received flavor notes from Lucasfilm saying, like, this doesn't feel in character, this feels out of universe.
Yeah, that's always been something that struck me as being an animator, is like, I don't have any sword training or lightsaber training or anything like that. So trying to come up with attacks, I'm just like, how do I not look like I'm trying to swing a sword and hit someone, because whoever the character is supposed to be skilled at it, right? So I always find that a little bit difficult to do. But that's interesting that Lucasfilm has told you then that you are a Sith. Basically, that's what side you would be in the Star Wars universe, is you be a Sith.
Oh no, they said that they would. Sorry, not Sith. They Cal couldn't feel like a Sith or like the dark side. Yeah. Right, yeah, but he had to feel like a Jedi, and so the Jedi had like there was restraints within the combat. And there's an interesting thing about reference that we found was we looked at Star Wars, the cartoons, but then we went into the behind the scenes and we looked at what inspired Star Wars and what inspired the fight choreographers on Star Wars and what types of martial arts they incorporated. And we watched behind the scenes and interviews, and we watched for like the storytelling side, they watched all the stars, but then they also watched Kurosawa films and sort of all the stuff that traditionally is in the behind the scenes for what inspires inspired Lucas in the beginning. And I think because we sort of didn't just pick some arbitrary point in the Star Wars universe and copy that, but we referenced Star Wars and then sort of went back to what they referenced. Our imagination, like the pot that our imaginations were sitting in, was the right place, and so stuff we came up with sort of automatically was the right flavor. And so like I said, we never had. I don't recall any animation flavor coming in from Lucasfilm saying like this doesn't feel like a Star Wars creature, or that doesn't feel like a Star Wars creature.
Yeah, that's cool that you guys went all the way back to what inspired them. That's a great idea. Is there a part of Jedi Fallen Order that you would go back to and do differently if you could? He's thinking, chat.
That's a hard question. I don't know. I'm fairly proud of most of the decisions we made. A lot of them, I'm proud of the approach we took given the time constraints that we ended up being in different places. So, the only thing I would want to do differently would require much more time, and it would be to add more variety to the flavor side of the animation. So, one of the things, I guess this is another thing I'm fairly proud of, is that Cal has an attack. Like when you first press attack, it's the same animation unless if you go from idle and press attack, it's always the same animation. But if he's locked onto a character and strafing and presses attack, you cover the same metrics. The blade does more or less the same thing, but I gave him a new body motion to sort of say, I'm doing this attack, but considering this momentum I'm coming from. So his first attack actually had like 6 variations to it based on the directions he could be moving right when you press that button to try and sell the body weight. And the thing that I would like to do, that if I could or if we had time, is the thing, I'm like not disappointed because we just didn't have time really, but I would like to do more of that sort of thing, more flesh out the corners and put a little bit more variation in so you don't see as much of the same action.
Yeah, I feel like that's a common thing in video games. We all just want to vary it up a little bit more.
Yeah.
Was there a part of the Star Wars universe that you wanted to work on that you didn't get to work on, like or like a character or a race? Because, like I said, that's a huge universe.
There's a weird little creature that exists on the Zepho planet in one of the temples, and it's in place, and it has
Jar Jar.
Nope.
That's 1,000% Jar Jar.
I mean, that's kind of the animated dream. I'm going to say it right now. But there's a creature that we have in our game that just has like stalks, tentacles, and it kind of inflates. And it's super, super limited.
Yeah.
And when I saw its concept art coming up, I didn't end up getting to work on this character, but when I saw its concept art coming up, I wanted to work on it because I saw it as this limited character, and I just wanted to go completely overboard because it was so limited. I wanted to be able to just throw all the variation, weird fidelity into it. That I guess I thought it would be a fun corner to spend way too much time, but obviously production constraints and everything, like no one's able to do that. But
yeah, makes sense.
But yeah, Jar Jar's a close second.
I mean, he's got a lot of moving parts. I think he'd be kind of fun. He's based. I mean, he's animated already, so yeah. Let's see. All right, I think we're almost out of time. We have about 3 minutes left. Can you tell everyone where... Oh, wait, no, we have one more. Sorry. How is collision calculated? Is it a volume attached to the weapon that collides with the player?
Oh, you mean for doing damage?
Yes, for doing damage. We totally changed it up.
No, that's fine. That's like super technical. Yes, it's I've worked on games where there's just like an AoE that gets spawned in front of the character and anyone in it gets hit. But in our game, it was tied very tightly to the weapon. And we wanted it to have the feeling that when you hit someone, the weapon was causing the hit and not just like, oh, I pushed this button and then like a bunch of people took damage. And if you slowed it down, you'd see that like some of them were taking damage before the weapon even got to them. We wanted it to be very tied to the weapon. And it also factored into combat design's desire to make this a very tight combat system where the sort of the game you're playing with your enemy is very real in the sense that it's with that weapon and you're not trying to
Mm-hmm.
weird game effects or something like that.
Yeah.
It's like kind of like a what you see is what you get in terms of getting hit.
Cool. Awesome. I said we are about out of time. Can you tell everyone where they can find you if they would like to follow you or hear more from you or anything like that?
I think my Twitter handle is linked in the exchange.
Yeah,
I think
we'll go
it's
ahead.
Nate Sketch.
We'll go ahead and just trigger that too, so that they can have that.
Yeah, right there. It's going to be outdated, but I generally I have a few people that pretty much only message me through Twitter, and so I'll still if someone reaches out to me directly, I'll still usually get that message.
Awesome.
So if you look at it and you're like, he hasn't posted for 2 years, that's nothing to worry about.
Well, thank you so much for your talk. It's good to know that if I play that game, that it'll be my fault that I suck at it and not your fault that you suck at it. It makes it very sad for me, but I'll keep that in mind. Thank you so much, Nathan, for being on screen.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been really fun to share.
Awesome. Bye, guys.